Video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. The Russians continue improving their drone usage tactics. The Russians try to attack not just objects of energy facilities or objects of military facilities. The Russians are trying to use drones to attack also positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the deep rear. For example, very interesting video we got around from the city of Zaporozhye. In this video, we can see how Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover positions of the armed forces of Ukraine, of FPV drone operators most likely, and then the Russians began bombing and attacking this territory with drones. So as you can see, lots of explosions were recorded, secondary detonation as well. The Russians are saying that the entire team of drone launchers were destroyed. Something like this also happened in the northeastern part of the Kharkiv Oblast. So this is the area where the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the situation against Russian offensive operation. The Ukrainians deployed additional forces, additional FPV drone teams in this area with the purpose to attack Russians. But the Russians managed to discover the Ukrainians first, and they attacked their temporary deployment point with significant number of drones. As you can see, lots of explosions were recorded. Another team of FPV drone operators of the armed forces of Ukraine was destroyed. So this is very important step in the special military operation. And you know that several days ago I read very interesting article that somebody from Ukrainian side noted that currently the Russians are not even focused on the ground. The Russians are not even focused on logistic roads. The most important thing that the Russians are tasked for to destroy as many as possible FPV drone teams, because this is the most important part of any army, of any military forces, at least during the special military operation. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and first let's continue with the Zaporozhye direction, which defense most likely has collapsed completely. The Russians continue their offensive operation on the eastern flank of this direction. During the previous night, during the previous 12 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. So this is the map by the end of the 12th of September, and this is the map by the beginning of the 30th of September. As you can see, according to different mappers, mainly according to neutral and pro-Russian mappers, as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to improve their positions between the villages of Novoselovka, Sosnovka, and Kharosha. Now the Russians are tasked to take under complete control this stronghold, which is located on the outskirts of the settlements of Aristopol and Velika Mikhailovka. Furthermore, the Russians, after they managed to establish control over the village of Ternova, maintained the lines between villages and settlements by taking under control different tree lines, fortifications, fields, and many other constructions in this area. Furthermore, according to neutral mappers, as a result of offensive operation, first groups of the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to enter the settlement of Berezova. Currently, there are very heavy clashes for this territory. It seems that Ukrainians in coming days would be forced to fall back from this area, because the Russians, according to the same resource, according to pro-Russian and neutral mappers, also managed to establish complete control over the settlement of Novomikhailovka. The village fell in Russia's hands, and the Russians will try now to outflank the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of Berezova from the southwest and from the west. So the front line of the Zaporozhye direction has collapsed completely. As we can see, we don't see any possibilities or any chances from the Ukrainian side to stabilize the situation with these resources, with these forces they have. Obviously, if Ukrainians want to stabilize the situation in this area, they need to bring additional forces, most likely from the Pokrovsk or from the Kostiantynivka direction. But the problem is that Ukrainians can't do this if they take some forces from this area, and if they bring them here, most likely the Ukrainians will start suffering the same problems in the Pokrovsk or in the Kostiantynivka directions. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the western part of the Donetsk region. If you remember, in August, the Ukrainians counterattacked in this direction, and as a result of those counteroffensive, where the forces of the 37th Marine Brigade, 67th Mechanized Brigade, 5th Heavy Mechanized Brigade were involved, the Ukrainians managed to restore a control over villages, some villages in this area, and according to information we have, Ukrainian forces were able to get the village of Tolstoy Rostoy. So that was the counter-offensive operation of the armed forces of Ukraine in August. But today, according to information we have, as a result of counter-attack, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to restore control almost over every single square kilometer that the Russians lost during the Ukrainian counter-attack. So based on the report that was published by neutral mappers, we adjusted the map back in Russian favor, or some territories were colored as a gray zone or contested area. Now we are waiting for additional proofs to color once again these territories in Russian favor. At the same time, the armed forces of Ukraine carry out a very powerful counterattack in the area of the village by the name of Filia. Ukrainians published this video where we can see how exactly the Ukrainians were attacking the village and how Ukrainians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement to force the Russians to fall back, and Ukrainians established their own Ukrainian flag. Based on this video, and by the way, this counterattack took place 2 or 3 weeks ago, but just now the pro-Ukraine resources published the video. Based on this report, we adjusted the map back in Ukrainian favor. So now the Russians lost control over a village on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha in the area of the Dnipropetrovsk region. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, additional changes and additional reports were recorded. The Russians continue their offensive operation to the west of the city of Pokrovsk with the purpose to get as close as possible to the M30 road. In this video, we can see how Russians were trying to establish certain control over the M30 road area with the purpose not to allow any forces to get inside of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. In this video, we can see how the Russians were hunting for Ukrainian forces and soldiers that were trying to hide in the forest in this tree line. Furthermore, if you remember, during the previous days, we were talking a lot about Ukrainian counterattack in the area of the Shakhovo pocket, and as a result of this counterattack, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 10th of September of 2025. This is the situation by the end of the 11th of September. The Ukrainians improved their positions around the village of Vladimirovka. By the end of the 12th of September, according to neutral mappers, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions to the east and the southeast of the villages of Sofiyivka and Shakhova. So they were pretty successful during those attacks. By the beginning of the 30th of September, the pro-Russian resources published this video where we can see how Russians were bombing the settlement of Vladimirovka, its central part. So this video confirms that indeed the neutral mappers were almost correct or partially correct regarding Ukraine counterattack. Based on this video, we colored the central part of Vladimirovka under complete Ukraine control. So now we have no doubts that indeed the Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, at least managed to restore control over this part of the settlement. Furthermore, I would like to remind you that pro-Ukrainian resources reported that the Ukrainians managed to answer this northern part even of the village of Novotoretska. So maybe this is not the end of the picture in this area. Furthermore, according to information we have, yesterday we colored territory to the east of the Shakhovo pockets as a gray zone because neutral mappers reported about counterattack in this area as well. But today we got this video where we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russian positions with FPV drone. So which means that most likely this part, let's say part of the front line is still under complete control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Anyway, the clashes in this area continue. Today we believe we're going to get additional updates, and today we believe we're going to get additional report from the pro-Ukraine resources. Furthermore, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrskyi, came to the Dobropolye direction, the Pokrovsk direction, with the purpose probably to inspect the situation on the ground, to talk with the commanders of brigades in this area, and to talk with the commander of the 4th Military Corps, probably to discuss what exactly the Ukrainians need to do further to stop the collapse of their front line and to force the Russians to fall back. So due to this visit, we believe that in coming days the clashes in this area will intensify. Most likely the Ukrainians will try to increase their pressure with the purpose to stabilize the situation completely and to force the Russians to fall back from the area of breakthrough towards the road N32. But as we discussed in the previous video, as I see according to the situation on the ground on different directions, it seems that the Russians don't care about this area. It seems that it was something like a trap for the armored forces of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians were forced to reintroduce very powerful and well-trained units in this area to stabilize the situation. The Ukrainians during this battle suffer huge losses, and at the same time we see that the Russians improving their positions in the Zaporozhye direction, Konstantinovka, Syrskyi, and Liman. So it seemed that the trap of the armored force of the Russian Federation worked out. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinovka direction. According to geolocations and according to information we have, the Russians have begun assault operation on the city of Konstantinovka, and the first groups of Russian forces answered the city itself. We are talking not about the central part, of course, we're talking about the residential area in the southeastern part, we're talking about these dachas. So let's discuss everything step by step. So this is the situation on the map by the beginning of the 30th of September. So, and this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 10th of September, and this is exactly the moment when the Russians launched their major offensive operation with the purpose to break through Ukraine defense in the southeastern part, to take the southeastern part completely and to enter the city itself, as you can see. But during the 10th of September of 2025, we received a lots of videos of how Russians were attacking with FPV drones Ukraine vehicles, soldiers and positions. As you can see, lots of episodes were geolocated, lots of videos were published, and obviously this is not something like a regular activity of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. This is something like the preparation before the beginning of a major assault. So lots of episodes were recorded. Ukrainians suffered huge losses during these attacks, and right after this wave of FPV drone attacks, the Russians began their major offensive operation. And as a result of clashes during the first day, the Russians took under control very important strongholds in the southeastern part, and this control was confirmed by pro-Ukraine resources. Here we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians that were taking under control this dense network of the fortifications, and based on this video we colored this territory under complete Russian control. Later we got report that the Russians improved their positions also from the south. So this information was provided by neutral mappers without proofs, and as a result of offensive operation, as we can see, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of Pritiechino and in the area of Alexandra Shultina, and these attacks from the north and from the south led to the situation that the armed forces of Ukraine, who were located on the territory of these huge forests and these strongholds, were caught in cauldron by the Russians without any chances for evacuation. So the Ukrainians stuck and most likely without any chances to escape this cauldron. And also at the same time we got this video published by pro-Ukrainian resources, and here we can see dozens of episodes of how Ukrainians were attacking Russian soldiers and Russian units already on the territory of Konstantinovka. And as you can see from this video, we're talking not about just a sabotage and reconnaissance group. We can see vehicles, we can see cars, we can see motorcycles, we can see trucks, we can see lots of equipment, and obviously this video confirms that the Russians answered the city of Konstantinovka with the regular army. So a lots of episodes, and one of them was geolocated exactly in this point. So as you can see, based on this video, we can make a conclusion that hundreds of buildings of the Konstantinovka dachas were already taken by the Russians by the morning of the 30th of September. And obviously this means that the pockets where Ukrainians were caught in cauldron collapsed completely without any chances for evacuation. Obviously it will take some time, several days, before Russians secure this area, and then they will be able to improve and to increase their pressure on the city of Konstantinovka in the full strength. Furthermore, the sources reported that now the Russians are trying to increase their pressure along the river of Krivoy Tarets and the railways between Lipovka and Pleshevka with the purpose to join the, let's say, combined assault operation also from the south. So the battle has begun. Now the Ukrainians, with Syrskyi, are forced to make a decision whether to rely just on the current forces in this area or to bring some reinforcements and reserves from the Pokrovsk direction, which is obviously a very huge risk for him. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Kupiansk direction. During the previous 12 hours, pro-Ukraine resources published this video. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians carry out the third pipeline operation. Here we can see how Russians using pipelines were crossing the river Oskol and were answering the northern outskirts of the city of Kupiansk. The Russians are saying that this pipeline length is several kilometers. The pro-Ukrainian story is saying that the length of the pipeline is several kilometers, and the pro-Ukraine resources are saying that the entrance to this pipeline is located somewhere here, and the Russians left the pipeline somewhere here. So 6 kilometers below the surface, without any problems from the Ukrainian side, without FPV drones, without anything. The Russians continue sending more and more troops from the Russian side of the river Oskol in the direction of the city of Kupiansk, trying to concentrate for as many as possible units in this area. And pro-Ukraine resources are saying that this is exactly the reason why the Ukrainian defense in the northern part of the city of Kupiansk collapsed completely. As for now, the situation hasn't been changed in comparison with previous days, but the sources are saying that most likely the city of Kupiansk will fall in Russians' hands also in coming days, weeks, or maybe months. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.